barbarians from the gate.
I got into the labor movement not because I wanted to negotiate wages. I got into the labor movement because I saw it as a vehicle to do massive social change to improve the lots of people.
Let's take these son of a out and give America back to America where we belong. Thank you very much. Thank you.
As far as I'm concerned, the Tea Party can go straight to hell. I am a real American. Fight for the rights of every man. I am a real American. Fight for what's right. Fight for your life.
Hey, welcome back to the program. Start of hour number 2 begins right now. Brian Sommerfield and Trucker Randy, we are your defending fathers. And we are joined by J.B. Williams from the North American Law Center. Thanks for joining in this morning.
Been fine. I've got a little more voice than I had yesterday, so I'll do the best I can.
Good deal. We got your article that you sent to us about Obamacare and the government shutdown. And one of the things that you stated right there in the very first paragraph is that Obamacare is unconstitutional based on the June 28th, 2012 Supreme Court ruling. Why don't you explain that a little bit?
Unfortunately, most people, back when that ruling was issued, relied upon media reports and pundits' opinions out there for what the ruling from the Supreme Court actually said, rather than going and reading the actual ruling itself. If you go read the ruling itself, which is linked at the North American Law Center website on this document, this is a white paper. It's about 14 pages long. It goes into great detail. It quotes directly from that decision from the Supreme Court last June. And if you go and read it, what you'll find is, as is often the case these days, there was a 5-4 split on the court as to the constitutionality of Obamacare. But as you read through it, what you'll find is, I think there are 6 different areas that were decided by the 5 judges. And in all 6 cases, which are in the document, the 5 members of the court conclude that Obamacare, as it was written and rushed through Congress, is in fact unconstitutional in all 6 of those areas, number one. And then, of course, you've got the dissenting view of the other 4 judges, but they're not dissenting on whether or not the parts of Obamacare are unconstitutional or not. What they're dissenting on largely is the 5 judges' ability to alter Obamacare in a fashion that makes it appear as though it is constitutional, and which, of course, the court has no authority to do, no constitutional authority to do whatsoever. And so, at the end of the day, if you read through the entire ruling is 193 pages long, but about 30 pages of it is the most critical parts. The other parts are referring to this case and that case and the other case for the grounds in the ruling. But at the end of the day, all 9 judges agree that numerous parts of Obamacare are, in fact, unconstitutional. What they disagree on, 5 decided that they could simply call it something it's not, a tax, and create the appearance that it could be constitutional, allowing it to go forward, when in fact it has been determined by all 9 judges that it's not constitutional.
So the bottom line is, when John Roberts deemed it a tax, he basically legislated from the bench.
He absolutely legislated from the bench. And but the way he did it, and I want to point something else out that's important, the U.S. Supreme Court has 2 different types of jurisdiction. It has what's called appellate jurisdiction, which is the authority to review and rule on lower court opinions. And then it has original jurisdiction, which means it's the only court in the country that has any jurisdiction at all. Under the Constitution, anytime a state or group of states is at conflict with the federal government over a constitutional matter, the U.S. Constitution gives the U.S. Supreme Court original jurisdiction, meaning that no other court in the country has any jurisdiction at all. And the original jurisdiction of the High Court is different than the appellate jurisdiction. Because 26 states, ultimately 12 originally, filed suit on this in the Florida federal court, later reviewed by an appellate court and eventually ending up at the Supreme Court last June, it was taking an appellate review position. It was reviewing the opinions of the lower courts. And essentially it was upholding what the lower courts also found, and that is that these different sections of Obamacare are in fact unconstitutional. Now, what happened, though, is under appellate review, they make a statement. Roberts makes a statement and says in order for this to be constitutional, it would in fact have to be a tax. And it was not passed as a tax. A tax bill has to initiate in the House of Representatives. The Senate cannot initiate a tax bill.
JB, that's been what I have just been questioning since the Roberts decision. And why didn't Roberts just go ahead and right there and just finish the point and say, look, it should have originated in the House. It didn't. Therefore, it's unconstitutional, and just be done and over with it, since he had to change it in order to make it work.
Well, I can only speculate as to what pressures were on Roberts at the time he wrote this ruling. So I won't even bother to speculate as to why he might have done what he did. But what the ruling does say in the end is because of all of these unconstitutional sections of the bill, it is voidable. Now, voidable means it has no legal standing. It means it has no legal force or function. It is easily voided because of these sections. Okay? And then he stops short of saying, therefore, we now deem it void, right? And so what they did is it kind of left it in the hands of the states by saying it's voidable, which allowed states to opt out of Obamacare. The problem then becomes, if they could opt out of Obamacare state by state without any penalty, then no harm, no foul, okay? But because the bill does not allow a state to opt out without penalty. In fact, the penalties are very significant. The withdrawal of federal funds for Medicaid and other things are attached to all of this. It now goes back into what is properly deemed extortion and coercion by the federal government to force states not to opt out due to the penalties involved if they do opt out. Same way with individual insured. They can opt out, but not without penalty. And so it's an extortion scheme in its most fundamental form, and an effort by the federal government to coerce both the states and businesses and individuals into opting in to Obamacare, which the Supreme Court last June said in all these areas it's unconstitutional. And then one last final point for the listener is that the court has no authority whatsoever under original jurisdiction or under appellate jurisdiction, either one, has no authority to say that 6 sections are unconstitutional, but the rest of it is constitutional. If any part of a bill is unconstitutional, then the whole thing is unconstitutional.
JB, can you stay on through the break? I've got a couple more questions, and you're just warming up.
Sure, no problem.
Stick around. We've got more with J.B. Williams when we return. We are your defending fathers.
I never meant to be so bad to you. One thing I said that I would never do.
Welcome back to the program on this Wednesday morning. Brian Sommerfield, Trucker Randy, your defending fathers. J.B. Williams on with us as well, talking about an article that he wrote over the, it was forwarded to us over the weekend from the North American Law Center, called Shutdown of Federal Government Set to Uphold Federal Health Care Extortion Scheme.
One of the things that happened here in Michigan, JB, that we had a big battle over, and it actually caused one of our state senators to decide that he was not going to run for re-election in 2014 because he was going to vote yes to expand Medicaid here in Michigan. He knew he was going to vote for it, and he knew how hard his district was going to fight him on it. He actually came out 3 weeks before the vote and announced his early retirement. He wasn't going to run for a second term. It barely passed with the bare minimum of 20 votes out of 38 state senators. It passed 20 to 18. Was this expansion of Medicaid in Michigan required as part of Obamacare? And what you were talking about is where the states had the rights or the options not to participate. Was this all part of that process you were talking about?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a forced expansion of Medicaid at the state level. And if the state opts out of that expansion, then the federal government is withdrawing Medicaid funds from that state. And they're doing it under the heading of they can no longer fund what they disagree with the state's management of those funds. Well, what they're disagreeing with isn't the mismanagement or management of those funds. It's the simple fact that the state rejected Obamacare. And so it's being penalized. This is why what's happening here falls under the heading of extortion and coercion, is because you're penalized if you opt in, and you're penalized if you opt out. Either way, and I say, I want to correct something. I didn't write this. It's not a column. It's not an article. It's a 14-page white paper on the subject of the constitutionality, and it was written by a group of people at North American Law Center and reviewed by a group of constitutional legal professionals before it was published. So we're very comfortable with what we're saying in here. It's not a typical article from me. In fact, I haven't even done an article on this yet, although I will in the next couple of days. But this is a white paper that goes into detail about the true legal standing, if you will, of Obamacare. And anyone who has paid much attention or looked closely at Obamacare itself, which is difficult to do, it's a mile-high document, as is often the case coming out of D.C. right now. If you've looked closely at it, you realize it has nothing to do with providing health care at all, really. What it is the greatest seizure of private assets and the greatest intrusion on constitutional rights in the history of the United States. It gives the federal government the power to not just force the purchase of health care, but to penalize you if you don't do it. Same way with businesses, to force businesses to handle health care with employees in a certain way. And if you don't face punitive damages or penalties from the federal government, then it's probably going to put you out of business. And even at the state level, when it comes to the expansion of Medicaid, as you're describing there in Michigan, the state is being forced by the federal government or coerced and extorted into having to opt in or face the loss of federal funding for their state Medicaid funding. And so this is what creates a situation with Obamacare that boils down to nothing more than a grand extortion scheme. And yes, it's directly related to what you saw happen there. And in my home state, the state opted out, and immediately the federal government started withdrawing funds. And so it's unconstitutional to do everything they're doing here. And it was ruled as such in effect by all 9 Supreme Court justices over a year ago. If anybody goes and bothers to read the actual ruling, it is unconstitutional. And therefore, the point of putting this out a couple of days ago and making you all aware of it, and thanks for having me on to discuss it, is that the House of Representatives is currently withholding funding for Obamacare. And the fact is, as we're talking today, I see in the background that Boehner is suggesting a super committee now be formed, eliminating everyone else in Congress and the representation of most of Americans out there in order to resolve this government shutdown. In other words, to cave in and cut a deal in a back room somewhere that allows all this to get put to bed. But it's going to get put to bed in an unconstitutional fashion, just like Obamacare was created. And at the end of the day, it's the greatest seizure of private assets in the history of the United States. It's not about health care. It's about the fact that the government has run itself into a financial hole it can't dig itself out of. And what most people don't realize is the current federal financial projections are based on all the money they're going to take in through Obamacare. So when Obamacare is not funded and not fully implemented, those funds have to be stripped back out of these budgets, and the country is essentially bankrupt at that point. So it's a huge issue. It's a huge matter. And the reason we put this out when we did is because the House of Representatives is currently withholding those funds. And the fact is, because it's an unconstitutional act, it will be illegal and unconstitutional for the House to fund it.
Do you think they realize that, or do you think they don't have a clue?
Well, I think some of them realize it and some of them don't have a clue. But I think it's up to the American people to make sure they know it. And so what we did is we put this together and vetted all the information in it, and we put it up at NorthAmericanLawCenter.org. And if you go to the action button, it's the top item in there. And at the end of the day, we put it up there as a downloadable PDF. And if people go there and download it and make sure that their members of the House have it, at that point, we can make sure, it's up to us to make sure that every member of the House knows that funding Obamacare is, in fact, in itself illegal and unconstitutional, and makes the House of Representatives party to the extortion.
Unbelievable. Because that was one of the components Brian and I talked about, and we only have a couple minutes here before the bottom of the hour break. If you can stay on, we'd love to have you. But, that's one of the things we talked about, is there's actually a term for what the House is doing. It's called appropriation legislation. It's their job as being in control of the purse strings to legislate what bills they will fund, what government programs they will spend money on, just because, quote unquote, it's the law of the land is what they're trying to sell us, and that it's been upheld in the Supreme Court as being constitutional, and Obama won the election over Romney running on repealing it. What they're doing is actually been done for many, many, many decades, is they can actually choose in the House what laws they're going to spend money on. Isn't that true?
That's absolutely true. The House of Representatives alone. This is why I've always thought it was nuts, by the way, for people to blame a president for a bankrupt nation, or even the Senate for a bankrupt nation, because the purse strings in the United States, constitutionally speaking, are controlled by the House of Representatives. Right now, since 2010, Republicans control the House of Representatives. So whatever happens, whether it's related to Obamacare funding or the debt ceiling, which is coming up on the 17th again, whatever happens, it is the responsibility of the House of Representatives to control the purse strings and decide what is or is not going to receive funding. The president can request a budget, which he has for 5 years, and Congress has never approved for 5 years. There is no budget. There's just a continuing resolution to fund things while we don't have a budget, okay? And so what this is, even this right now, this shutdown is not over a 2014 budget. We haven't had an congressional approved a budget since Barack Obama became president of the United States. Not one. What this is just a stopgap measure budget that gets us from now to the end of the year, and then we're going to be back here doing this again after we increase the debt ceiling again on the 17th. And so what some members of the House are correctly doing at this point is saying we're simply not funding Obamacare. We'll fund other things, but we're not funding that because it's illegal, it's unconstitutional, and 70% of Americans don't want it. And they're exactly right. But they're going to be under enormous pressure to fund Obamacare when they run up against the debt ceiling argument coming on the 17th.
Well, good stop right there, and we're ready to hit the bottom of the hour break for the news. Stick around. We have more to come, and my head is about ready to explode on a lot of this. So stick around. We are your defending fathers.
Now, your defending fathers, Brian Sommerfield and Randy Bishop.
Hey, welcome back. We're joined by J.B. Williams, and he's doing a masterful job as always. J.B., thanks so much for coming on today and in all your input. It's really great stuff.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
One of the questions that you bring up is the government shutdown, and Boehner is allegedly setting up a super committee to, I guess basically this super committee would represent the entire U.S. Congress. The individual congressmen wouldn't have any input to this super committee, and they're going to go and and negotiate, and then have to take this back to the full House, I would think, is what the process would be. Wouldn't it be, JB?
No, what they do with these super committees, which the super committee process is unconstitutional itself. What they say is, look, the House and the Senate can't agree in its full body, so we want to have the House and Senate membership give us the authority to cast their vote for them in a private backroom meeting that we call a super committee. So when the super committee goes and cuts a deal, they're doing it with the authority of the members of Congress who are not in the room.
So the guys as a whole don't even get a vote on it. They're basically giving their proxy to the super committee members?
Correct.
So whatever they come up with, that's the done deal? That's what the House is agreeing to?
Correct.
Not only is it not constitutional, but who grants this super committee their authority to take that proxy?
Nobody.
So they
have no such authority.
So Boehner organizes the committee and anoints it as having total power and representation for the whole full House, and nobody has to vote on it or approve that?
Just the super committee members.
Unbelievable. And so basically he can find 6 or 12 or however many number of moderate rhinos that are willing to cave into this thing and have them go meet with the super progressive communist Democrats, and they negotiate a deal, and the representatives of our Congress, especially our Congressman Dan Benishek, he's not going to be on that super committee, even though he's a former surgeon of 30 years and got elected on that basis to go to Washington to fight Obamacare. He probably is not even going to be part of that super committee, so our first district won't even have any representation.
You got it. You got it perfect.
Unbelievable.
I can't improve on how you just described it. And here's something I want to point out to listeners, too. I took a look at the makeup of the two houses of Congress, the two chambers. While we were doing the research on this white paper, it's not in the white paper, but we did the research for it, and we can add it later as an appendix. But we took a look at the makeup. Do you have any idea what percentage of the members of the House have any medical or healthcare experience? 6.8%. 6.8% of the House members have any medical background or healthcare background. Okay? 3% in the Senate. That's all. So what are these people doing, monkeying around in an industry they have no knowledge of whatsoever?
Mm-hmm.
And I go back to what I was saying before. This has never been about providing affordable health care. It's always been about the greatest seizure of private assets in American history. That's what this Obamacare is about. And the reason that they have the power to do that is they're going to extort.
Jose's Authentic Mexican.
Whoa, sorry about that. Go ahead.
They're going to simply, by force of penalty, and I want to read something from the very first part of the Roberts ruling, very first part of the ruling, so that people understand exactly what we're saying here. And I'm reading verbatim from the ruling. The present challenge, which this is talking about the lower court case filed by the 26 states, which the 26 states attorney generals, they all know that the lower federal court had no jurisdiction on this matter, neither did the appellate court. This matter belongs straight at the U.S. Supreme Court under original jurisdiction. And I'll come back to that point in a minute because it's important. But because this is appellate review, in finding number 1 of this ruling, Roberts writes, the present challenge seeks to restrain the collection of the shared responsibility payment. Now, that's what they called it because they couldn't call it a tax. They couldn't call it a tax because it wasn't initiated in the House. You follow?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they didn't call it a tax. They called it a shared responsibility payment from those who do not comply with the individual mandate. But Congress did not intend the payment to be treated as a tax for purpose of the Anti-Injunction Act. The Affordable Care Act described the payment as a penalty, not a tax.
Right.
Because the Senate can't initiate a tax bill. You see what I'm saying?
Totally. That's where Brian's argument has been, is that it should have been ruled unconstitutional just based on it not originating in the House.
And it was ruled unconstitutional on that basis, along with 6 other bases. But then 5 Supreme Court justices, including Roberts, decided that they were going to give themselves the power
to fix it,
to alter what was passed in the legislature by pure party line vote, by the way, in the dark of night.
Yep.
Okay. The 5 Supreme Court judges decided that they were going to fix it by saying, okay, we're just going to call it a tax. Well, the problem with that is it isn't a tax, and the ruling says it isn't a tax, and the bill says it isn't a tax, and it didn't initiate in the House, so it can't be a tax. So the whole ruling ends with this: it is voidable because of these issues. Now, that boots it to the states to void it. And one of the ways they can do that is to opt out, voiding it in their state. But the minute they do that, the federal government withdraws funding from the state. So there's an immediate penalty, and now we're back to extortion and coercion again.
Unbelievable. And see, the other component to this is so blatantly obvious. So many of us have been screaming about this ever since that Supreme Court ruling. Why is it that Boehner and this U.S. House of Representatives, this Congress, doesn't realize what you just said?
Well, I'm going to answer the question this way. We will find in the next few days, we will see, quote unquote, legal eagles, legal experts, even pundits on Fox News, come out and say, well, no, it's legal because the Supreme Court made it legal. Well, the Supreme Court has no authority to make it legal. But for 100 years now, we have been allowing the courts to make up the law as they go. So why are we objecting now?
Mm-hmm. Especially because they've allowed so much time to go by since the ruling last year that if this was, in fact, your argument is valid, we would have responded to it immediately. When Roberts wrote his opinion, we should have stood up screaming from the rooftops, this is not right. This is not constitutional based on what he just said, based on what he just did. They can't fix this bill. The Supreme Court got it wrong.
That's right. Part 2 of the ruling says this, that the individual mandate is not a valid exercise of Congress's power under Commerce Clause or the Necessary and Proper Clause, which is how it was put into effect by the U.S. Senate. Okay? So that is now ruled unconstitutional. Go to Part 3 and read that. The individual mandate must be construed as imposing a tax on those who do not have health insurance, if such construction is reasonable, which it's not, and nor is it constitutional. Okay? So that gets tossed out, and they say the Commerce Clause doesn't cover that. The Commerce Clause, to regulate commerce, does not include the power to create commerce. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Okay? To force people to enter into commerce. Okay? It does not include that. And so, again, I recommend people go read it. It's 14 pages long, and there's more coming in an update in a few days, okay, to this document. So stay involved and keep track of it. But mostly, download the downloadable PDF copy, read through it yourselves, and make sure that your members of the House of Representatives understand that this is blatant theft, coercion, and extortion, and to fund this is to join in the extortion scheme themselves.
Absolutely.
JB, on the second part of that, we're going to make sure that we get it in the hands of congressmen that we're associated with, as well as their aides, and we'll fully brief them on everything that you've talked about today. But I think the second part goes, if we get it in their hands, what can they do more than defund it? Is there anything else that can be done as far as inside the constitutional process to counter the Roberts ruling?
Well, you know, the truth is, we had long discussions about this as this paper was being drafted and vetted. We had long into the night hour discussions on this. Are we challenging the Roberts ruling, or are we simply asking for the Roberts ruling to be upheld? All 9 judges, and this is before you get to the dissenting views of the other 4 judges written by Scalia. If you go read the summation of the dissenting view by Scalia, he's dead on the mark on all of it. It's unconstitutional, start to finish in its entirety, period. It's voided. It doesn't exist. It has no force of law. And he's exactly right about that. And Alito and Kennedy, joined him in that dissension, and along with another, I'm forgetting what the other one was, but Thomas. And so they're dead on right about that. But here's the thing. The other 5 judges also said it was unconstitutional in its current form. They just thought they had the power to change the form. And so, of course, the 4 dissenting judges realized that the Supreme Court has no such authority.
Right. So bottom line, when the left makes the argument, that it's upheld as constitutional in the Supreme Court, it was just really upheld by 5, not 9, but 5 of the Supreme Court justices, only after they made alterations and fixes to it.
When the left says that this ruling upholds the constitutionality of Obamacare, that is a bold-faced lie, is what that is. That's like saying because the cops didn't arrive at the bank in time, they upheld the bank robbers' theft.
Right.
Okay?
The robbers had the right to rob the bank because the cops didn't get there in time.
Exactly. And so it's a bold-faced lie to suggest that this ruling in any way upholds the constitutionality of Obamacare. Again, if you just go read the sections that are quoted in this document on the website, you'll see that is a bold-faced lie. There are 6 counts by the 5 judges, and in all 6, they say what is in this is unconstitutional. Okay? Then there's the 4 judges that write a dissenting view, and they agree it's unconstitutional. Where the 2 parted company in a 5-4 decision is 5 thought they had the power at the Supreme Court to make it constitutional by calling it a tax. And the other 4 said that's ridiculous, and they're right.
Absolutely.
What's
that website again, real quick?
It's North American, spelled out, NorthAmericanLawCenter.org, and then you go to the action button on the homepage, and it'll open up a drop-down, and it'll be the first item on there.
Very good. We appreciate you being on the show today.
Listen, fellas, I appreciate you so much giving me a chance to come on and talk about this. This is critical. The people have to download this and get it to their House of Representatives right away, because right now the House of Representatives is in the right position. We have to give them the backbone to stay there. And to answer your other question before we go, there is an update coming to this with Remedy 2 at the state level and Remedy 3 by the people of the United States. So the first remedy is for the House to simply hold their ground and defund this thing and get rid of it out of the budget entirely. That's the first remedy. But in the event that we fail in convincing House Republicans to do that, to grow the spine to do the right thing here and not become part of the extortion, then we will supply Remedy 2 at the state level and Remedy 3 at the personal level.
Perfect. I'm so glad you closed with that, because that fully explains the process. I think we've got three easy steps we can follow. You're doing all the hard work. We'll take care of step 1, and we'll wait for step 2.
We got the ball, JB.
Yep.
Thank you, brother. I know you do. We've worked together before. You guys do great work up there in Michigan. I'm proud to work with you.
Hey, thanks. We'll do our best to get this out as quickly as we can. Thanks so much for your hard work, and we really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Be well, gentlemen.
Hey, thanks. Stick around. Final segment of Hour 2. When we return, we are your defending fathers.
If you can't go...
Final segment of hour number 2. Brian Sommerfield, Trucker Randy, your defending fathers.
Unbelievable, Brian.
That was an incredible interview.
Well, and we've been screaming that argument ever since last year when John Roberts shocked us. I mean, literally just knocked you and I right on our keisters when he ruled the way he did in his majority opinion when he wrote it. We were screaming that from the rooftops without even having all the 14 pages of constitutional research and justification that JB's firm has put together.
Mm-hmm.
We just knew they had fixed it from the bench and made it constitutional as a tax when it originated in the Senate and couldn't be a tax. It was unconstitutional to begin with. We talked about it last year.
Yes.
Why is it that these Congress people, these guys that are duly elected, that got sworn in the office, put their hand on a Bible and swore to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America, how is it that they don't understand this stuff?
I honestly don't know. In the story that we're going to when we come back from the break, we've got a couple minutes on this one.
Yeah.
Is something that we talked about it a little bit. It really doesn't hit our show, and so we didn't go into it in depth.
Yeah.
But it's something that we're going to have to go into in depth when we come back that talks about what's going on at the federal level, and you'll get my take on it as well as the information that's going to be presented. And the fact that we are playing around with a lot of this stuff and not actually acting on it. I'm so thankful with the way that J.B. Williams in his group at the North American Law Center has laid this out. It's like, okay, here's what's going on right now. This is what we need to do right now. We need to arm our representatives with this information so they can know that they are holding down the fort in the line in the sand. And I really don't even take it as a line in the sand. I take it as doing their job.
Not only doing their job, Brian, but I mean, even did you hear the last top of the hour news that we carried on this station?
No, I didn't.
Even our own news source, and I've heard this on Fox News. I saw it on Cavuto's show yesterday, talking about the United States government, the full faith and credit. How many times have we heard that term?
Yeah.
Defaulting on October 17th. Okay? They're talking about a week from tomorrow that if something's not worked out, that the full faith and credit of the United States of America is going to automatically default. It is such a bald-faced lie. It's just like what J.B. Williams just said. Every time you hear a liberal say that this thing was held up as being constitutional, that's a lie. And these congressmen and these people in Congress, especially the Republicans, need to know this information. I mean, I know we're going to forward it to, Justin Amash and Benishek and Camp and Stockman and all the other congressmen that we have relationships with.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, they collectively as a whole in caucus need to grab Boehner by the neck and say, dude, look at this. This is the legitimate interpretation of what happened last year in the Supreme Court. We have the power of the purse strings. We don't care if it's a law. We don't care if John Roberts and 4 other Supreme Court justices think they have the right to fix it. We have the right to not fund it. We can legislate based on appropriation.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the Constitution, and they have the constitutional right to do it. This is what I'm so frustrated. It's like, hello, we're screaming and yelling here. Why can't you guys hear us? Or do they hear us, Brian, and just choose to ignore it? Do they really want Obamacare to go through? So that's why they're not playing this hand? I mean, we've dealt them absolutely the best hand in poker you could possibly get.
Yep.
And they're not laying the cards down and saying, I'm all in. This is it, guys. Game over. Checkmate.
No, they're not.
They've got a walk-off home run, and they're not even swinging the bat.
Well, you got to round the bases and touch home plate on a walk-off home run in order to win.
Unbelievable. Man, I've got to go get some aspirin.
Well, you're going to need more aspirin when we come back, because I've got a story that is going to literally make you mad.
Wonderful.
You have to wait for the start of Hour 3. For that, we'll see you back after the top of the hour news. We are your Defending Fathers.
This is the Patriot Voice Radio Network.